Our next act, is a tandem. Michelle Eissele and Dave Shuman are going to work together on our next keynote. Michelle is the Senior Director for Data Operations at IHS Automotive. Michelle has 20 plus years of experience in IT and automotive and currently directs the North American team responsible for the data strategy and data operations at IHS Automotive. And as a member of the information technology leadership team, Michelle plays a key role in setting the data strategy for IHS Automotive business. And I think that's a little bit of what we were getting at here. Know your data, what's your strategy, how are you going to handle it. Dave Shuman is a big data expert with software firm Cloudera, who's our platinum sponsor today. And prior to this, he was Chief Operations Officer for Vision Chain, a leading demand signal repository provider enabling retailer and manufacturer collaboration. Dave started at Vision Chain as Director of Services and was responsible for implementation at such top companies as Kraft Foods, PepsiCo, and General Mills. Now, Dave has an extensive background in business intelligence applications, database architecture, logical and physical database design, and data warehousing. So, would you please welcome Michelle Eissele and Dave Shuman.
All right, thank you, everybody. So I am here today to talk to you, and I'm excited to talk to you about an initiative that we've been doing at IHS Automotive. For a little over a year now, we've been working on this, and we're nearing the end of the technical phase of it and now moving it more into the rollout. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, but before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of background, very briefly, about what IHS Automotive is about, because it kind of sets the stage for the project and why we embarked on what we did. So IHS Automotive at its core is all about data. What we do is we bring in thousands of different files and information of data, and then we add to that expertise and analytics, and then we create products for the automotive industry that helps them make decisions. So really, from a standpoint of what our business is, it starts with the data and what we can apply to it to be able to sell to our customers so that they can make their day-to-day decisions, become more profitable and more cost-effective. So some products that we have, just some examples I have up here. From a product planning and strategy, we do forecasts for components to help with production planning. We have marketing, where we do audience targeting, activation, and then optimization of that audience that we've selected. We do market reporting, sales analysis, where vehicles are being sold. We do vehicles in operation for the aftermarket, for where the vehicles are currently by geography and what type of vehicles they are. So those are some of the products that we have that feed into our customers. From a U.S. perspective, which is where our project was focused, we receive in household demographic data for all the households in the U.S. We receive in all the vehicle information. When you go to a DMV and you register your vehicle and title your vehicle, we receive all that information. We have vehicle information for what vehicles are being built. We have survey data and dealer information for where vehicles are sold. So that just kind of gives you a brief overview of what we do and what our business is. So a little over a year ago, we asked ourselves where we were and where we wanted to go. And we saw our opportunity very plain and very clear in front of us. You can see the chart up there. We were very good currently at being very descriptive and explaining to our customers what happened and then having them use that information to try and figure out what they wanted to do next. And we knew that we had a lot of information and a lot of experts where we could help do that. And so we really wanted to move up and have a growth opportunity to be more diagnostic, so we could explain why it happened, and to be more predictive, to be able to tell them what will happen, and then most importantly, how should they respond to that information. So as you can see, the size of the bubbles, we had this big space that we wanted to move to, and that's what our opportunity was. But we knew that with what we had in our current systems, we were not easily able to get there. The options and the products that we had in that were very difficult to come across and took a lot of time and a lot of effort from our analytics teams to do. So some of our challenges talked about already is that it was with most companies, we had optimized data warehouses that were answering very specific questions for very specific purposes and feeding into those products. but they weren't linked together. They were very siloed and very optimized. And then to add to the complexities to all of this, IHS actually acquired RL Polk here in Southfield about 1.5 years ago. So we actually had IHS that was siloed and Polk that was siloed, and the point of the acquisition was to be able to merge all the data sets together and be able to leverage it. So we had 2 different companies that were siloed, and we knew that we needed to be able to bring all that data together. So we built the business case, and at a very high level, this is what our vision was. And I look back on this now after doing this for a little over 1 year and say, oh gosh, this was so simple. But this is where we had to start to explain to the senior level business executives what we were trying to do and the power behind it. So you can see on the left-hand side there, we had the existing Polk data, we had the existing IHS data, and we knew in order to take that leap forward, we needed more data, and we needed to be able to explore with different data sets very easily, and to be able to fail quickly if the data set wasn't going to work, so we wanted to bring that in. We knew we needed to link the data. That was key to all of this. Again, we had siloed databases, and we wanted to have to be able to link once and not have to continue to link and have it be difficult. And then we wanted this bubble in the middle that was this data analytics warehouse that would allow us to see all this data and be able to do the analytics on top of it and the visualization on top of it. Ultimately, to be able to create a sandbox so people could play with the data and discover new insights that they hadn't seen previously. We wanted to be able to then turn that into products and have our production analytics team be able to use that data to sell to the customers. And then we also wanted to feed it into products where people could go in and customers could go in themselves and be able to do some analytics themselves with the data once combined. So this was our high-level vision. So we set about with the goal to build a foundational platform. So a little bit different than what we've talked about today with one specific business case for one use. Because data is core to what we do, we wanted to truly transform the way we process all the data and allow it to be available for our analytics team. So we really saw this as the building block for everything that we could then move to in the future. So key components, again, linking strategy, so core to bring the 2 data sets together, and then the sub-optimized databases. Another thing that was very important to us is privacy of the data. We take this very seriously. There are laws for how we can use the data, and the private information that is given to us by the state, we need to protect that. And so that was very important in the solution that we were going to build. Again, exploratory data sets, very important for us because we knew that we needed more data to be able to move into that next level of being more prescriptive and being able to tell people what their next step should be. We wanted it to be scalable, we wanted it to be fast and easy to use, and we wanted to utilize the best-in-class tools and technologies that were out there. And again, I cannot stress enough the 2 different portions. We wanted this sandbox to allow people to play, and then we wanted to be able to very quickly take those ideas and move them into production. So we created this conceptual design document, and there's a lot of boxes and a lot of words on here, but there's a couple of key takeaways to take from here. So the first thing is the color coding means something. So what the color coding means on this and how we use this to describe to the rest of the organization, white is stuff that's in place and will not change and does not need to change in our new system. The orange color, which does show up orange up there, is the stuff that already exists but we need to do it differently. And the blue is stuff that was brand new. So the key message to the executives and the rest of the organization here is that not everything has to change. There are things that we do today, those Oracle data warehouses that we have that feed products today have a lot of valuable information in them. They serve the purpose, they're going to the products, and there's been a lot of time and energy that was spent in building these and adding knowledge value to them already, and we want to leverage those and use those answers that we've already determined and be able to bring that into the platform as it is. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in all these different data sources that we have and all the knowledge we've already applied to it. And then again, transient data and exploratory data, we brought it in today, and before we did this project, we just didn't do it easily. So we needed to change the way that we did that so that we could make it very easy for the analysts to be able to bring this in and look at the data. And then the linking technology, we knew we had to start, and we needed to do that, and that had to be all new, and how we linked all the data together. The sandboxes, the data, the production warehouse versus the analytics sandbox, we needed to build that new because we did not have that today. And there were some tools that we needed to change and add to our analytics toolbox as well. So those are really the takeaways of what our conceptual design was. We used this to be able to sell it to what we wanted to do and really use this as a framework as we move forward to say what is this going to look like and what technologies are we going to use. So this is what we ended up building. So this is what our environment looks like today. Looks very similar to what the conceptual design is. We have our core data sets down at the bottom. We've kept those as is, like we had planned, brought those in. We have a way to bring in exploratory data and to bring in transient data for that. We have built our data linking technology. We've built by household linking and by an identity key where we've anonymized it. We've brought that in and we've been able to link by vehicles and geography. And then we've used the Cloudera implementation of Hadoop, which is where all of our data sits. We have 3 different levels of data. We have level 1, which is raw data, which is in a lot of cases the core data sets or exploratory data brought in as is. Then we have a level 2 where we've constructed the data, where it adds value to what we're saying when we link the raw data sets together. And then we have level 3, which is aggregated. And this is at the next level. A lot of these are outputs of models that we do that can be reused by other teams. And that's why we have those different access levels that are there. And we have SAS and Tableau that currently sit on top of it, and we're actually working on R right now. So let's talk a little bit about the data organization and why we did the levels the way that we did them. So it's really for ease and access of use. We have our data engineers that build that foundational level 1, and those are the people that would bring in the new data sets and put them into the environment. But then our analytics team will work in the level 2 and level 3 space, and at that point we've already made answers that we know other teams are going to want to repeat. And that's why we put that in the level 2, because we don't want analysts having to go in and ask the same questions multiple times. Once we ask them, we link the data, we create that data set. It's valuable for them, it's going to be valuable for somebody else. And so we wanted to leave it so that they would be able to access it. So now we have all of our history data all in one place in this Hadoop environment. We have vehicle ownership back to 1993, we have all the VINs back to 1961, and we've persisted the data such as the demographic data and the survey data, and all of that is in one central location that our analysts can get to. And then getting back to the security, what we've done from a linking perspective is we've basically anonymized everybody, and every household has a key that represents a name and an address. So we can now allow a lot of people to access this data because nobody can actually see the name and address. You can see history over time and look at the data, but it's all based on an anonymous linked key that they don't have the access to unlock. So that's very important for us, again, to protect the security of the data. And just to provide some ranges of volumes of data that we're talking about here. You can see the number of households that we have and then the number of vehicles, and then we linked all of this to create this garage composition. So every household has this ownership and what has changed, and then you can see the other data that we were able to link to it as well by using our linking keys. So you have the 3 billion ownership records out there. And then this at any point in time would be valuable enough, but the fact that we brought in all the history, we can see all this data over time. So at any individual household level, of course secure with their PIC key, you can see the events that occurred when people moved. You can see different new vehicle events, used vehicle events. You can see from our demographic data where children may have entered, such as Target with the mailers. So we can see the children enter into the household. And then we have survey data for those households that we receive survey data for. So we have that as well, income. And then we can link additional data that we haven't done yet, but it is set up now so that we can bring in additional data when we have the business case to do that. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to talk through a little bit as to what worked well and what we would do differently if we were to do this again. So one thing that worked really well for us is this was really a data-driven project. We had the data data was the ownership of the project with support from technology. So our director of our data management team is the one that actually led this with support from a high individual from our technology side, because it really is all about the data. The technology really was second for this, and this kind of goes back to the business use and how we're going to do this and know the data and what will we be able to do with this. We also use accelerated tools and platform selection to jumpstart our effort. We were so anxious to do this and we saw such value in it. We made the decision that we didn't want to go through a 3 or 6 month vendor selection process. We did our research, we accelerated this, we picked Cloudera and we went with it, which was very successful for us because we didn't have to take that time up front to go through that selection. We also, very key, assigned our best people to this. This was something that was core to our business and very important to us, and we put our A players on this, and so they were all involved. A lot of the people that we brought onto this were people from our data management team that had a lot of the data technology background and core data background for this and were able to adapt very easily to the new technology. We invested a lot up front for training and support from Cloudera. We sent every single person on the project to at least one training session and then a lot of self-learning. And we also had at least 2 weeks built in where the Cloudera architects came and actually sat with our team in a big room and walked through how to do all of this to make sure that we really were not hindered by the technology in any way. We allowed some time to play and discover in the new technology. We had some time up front, which worked well. We probably didn't have enough of that time in there, but we also didn't want to extend this into a 2-year project. And we did create a structured rollout plan and communication plan. That's actually where we are right now, is rolling this out to the rest of the organization and the analysts that are going to use it. It's something that we had planned from the beginning, but because we didn't have as realistic project timelines as we would like, which is under what we do differently, we focused on building the technology, and now we're actually spending some time now to try and implement those communication plans. One thing that would make that better is to involve users of the system more upfront. We tried to do that. Everybody was busy as we were embarking on this, and so we didn't have enough people that I think would have been more successful had we had them more upfront during the project, because it would make the rollout a little bit easier in the adoption of the new technology. So that was my last slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave now. Grab a water.
Michelle, you're going to take questions at the end as well, correct? Yes. So, big data. Is your data just bigger? You can't have a big data conference without somebody being the guy that comes up here and says words that start with the letter V. There's a lot of them out there. I keep hearing more. So every time we get through this, the volume, the variety, the velocity, the veracity, the value, I think we're running out of V words that get behind this. And in many ways, that kind of masks what it is that we really need to talk about here, because it's not about any of those things. This is about what you do with the data. And it's as much about technology as an enabler, but it's about your organization adopting and using big data. So this actually ends up being a pretty significant shift within the organization as you look at this, to say, how do we use big data? Because so many of the people in our organization who use data today and call themselves analysts are people who are used to pressing the big red easy button. They're getting data spoon-fed to them. It's already, all the process has been done upstream. When we brought data in for them to work with, we already created a data schema around that. So that presupposes the nature of the questions we're going to be able to pose to the data. And then on top of that, we've sort of put this interface layer between most of them, which are the BI team. And the BI team goes ahead and creates reports and insights and visualizations off that data. So if you talk around the community and you say, well, I have all these analysts here that use the data. And you say, well, what do you do with that? Well, I get reports. And then you get some of those that say, I drill, or I change filters. And taking that as a paradigm for who those people are in your organization that use data, and switching it around to them to say to those people, I'm going to give you access to data. And you know what I'm not going to do to it up front? I'm not going to impose a rigid structure on top of that. I'm going to let you work with the data. I'm going to let you discover things about the data. I'm going to let you pose a hypothesis. You're going to come up and say, I believe that this thing is true in my organization. And to get to the bottom of that, you're going to say, well, there's certain pieces of data that I need to know to understand that, to support those levels of assertions. And those people aren't the ones that are pressing the big red easy button in your organization. Those people are, candidly, you need to look for the ones that are already doing things in your organization today, like select star from table X. Find those people, because you know what happened? What they said is the structure that you put in front of me, the way that you gave me access to data in the organization is not sufficient to my needs. So I'm going to take that data out of your beautiful system over here, and I'm going to put it into my analyst tool of choice, which for most of the organization out there is Microsoft Excel. But you'll see that. So why do we need 1 million rows in Excel? You should never need 1 million rows in Excel. But the reason you need 1 million rows in Excel is people are building databases in Excel to try to get at the type of functionality in big data. You need to find and identify those people. Find everybody in your organization that has a license of Microsoft Access. Why? Because those are the people that are actually starting to innovate and think differently about using data. They're not just out there getting the big red easy button. They're creating macros on top of that. They're mashing it up with other sources. They're bringing their own data to there. They have their own proprietary sources on that. And those are the people that you need to find in your organization. So, data is the new oil. Data is your most important asset. Yeah, kinda. But you gotta be able to use it. Data sitting there is not your most important asset. That's a cost center. Where this becomes an asset is where you turn around and you put frameworks on it to use the data, and you create the organizational capacity for experimenting. You talked about getting into that, the first thing you want to do is start to figure out what to do with the data. This whole West Coast hypothesis forming structure around data where you say Google gives their people 20% of their time to play. Well, they're not playing. They're posing new hypotheses that aren't in the business plan today against the data, and they're driving new products off of that. So now I'm going to tell you about the world we live in. We live in a siloed world that's out there. And it's built because a lot of our data structures are around the applications that they were made for. So we see over here, we've got our CRM data, and we have our finance data, and we have our sales data. And a lot of those times, those exist in data silos. And so maybe we, as a company, have already invested. We've gone out there and we said, we're going to put in an enterprise data warehouse. And then we go ahead and use cloud providers. And those cloud providers have their own data assets out there. So I've got my clickstream data now sitting over here, and I have my campaign data sitting over here, and we've got more data silos that are generating around that. We often operate in those same things where we have limited frameworks that operate against that set of data. We have very prescribed tools that do very specific things around that. And our analysts are trying to get at that data in new and different ways and try experimentation with that, and they get frustrated. They start to go bouncing up against these tool sets, and you get this thing, this shadow IT. You hear that in the organization? These are people that are, putting up their own little data stores on there. You find somebody's got a SQL server sitting under their desk that they've got stuff going on in there. Because the frameworks that they were operating in, or the strictures and governance that were in those structures were too restrictive. They didn't let them get to that. And so rather than be frustrated by that and just give up, they went ahead and formed their own ways around that. But what happens to that then is now you have data everywhere in your organization. And so now you don't have the administration on that. Now you don't have the security around that data, these key things that are your assets. But you're also losing pieces of your intellectual property that go into that. These things that go into these macro-driven type formats on there, where if somebody wants to go on vacation, they hand over a 7-page instruction booklet on the 61 different steps you have to do to get to that level of insight. And so those things aren't repeatable, and you really are opening yourself up to a lot of risk. And so when we say, if analytics are everywhere, and if we are democratizing the access to this data, then this can no longer be in the hands of the few individuals. We have to create process within our organizations, and we have to enable those people with technology, with governance. Governance is not this. It's not the iron fist of governance. Governance should lift up the organization and enable them to get to these types of capabilities on there. This little guy. Hadoop. Funky name, isn't it? That is Hadoop, by the way. That is named after Doug Cutting's elephant, his son's little toy elephant. Funny story about that. That elephant now lives in Doug Cutting's sock drawer because he found his son still playing with it and dragging it out in the mud in the yard. He said, well, that's kind of iconic, so we want to save it. So Doug brings it up from time to time. He'll put it up on the lectern on it. This became this thing that is Hadoop. But what's interesting, Mike Olson, our Chief Strategy Officer, spoke at Strata this year, and he said one very interesting thing. He said, Hadoop's disappearing. And I said, well, I picked a bad company to come to. What do you mean? The reason why Hadoop is disappearing is because this is becoming less and less about the technology. We're starting to think about what we do with the data, how the data rules our organization, and we're not talking the same way about Flume and Pig and Hive and all that. We're saying, how do I put an operational framework on top of that so that my analysts can work with this data? And in doing so, how do I create this culture that lets that happen? One thing I wanted to pull back here. The frameworks that you're seeing that are coming in on top of this now, it's not about this old thing, MapReduce. This is all about extending interfaces that are familiar to your organization. It's SQL. It's search. These are things that people know how to do. We're trained on how to use that. So we're extending those frameworks into working with those within data. And that creates that kind of openness where people can create projects within there. And the security and governance enables that kind of collaboration where you can create these sets of end results, whether you're bringing data together, processing, discovering, modeling, and creating new products and applications off that data. That security and governance creates that environment that enables that. And so we were talking about in our former lives here, we're talking about how storage was always things. How many terabytes of data? It's not about that anymore. The frameworks will help that. But where we had these different analytical frameworks that were sitting out there, now we're looking into cohesively applying those frameworks to the data. It's bringing our thought processes, where do we have that data? And one of the things that has really radically changed about this type of framework here is we used to talk about security by obscurity. Nobody knew it was out there. There were 5 people in the room that could possibly write MapReduce anyway. And so this really wasn't a thing that we had to be concerned about. Now, Cloudera has over 1,400 partners that write software processes against Hadoop. And so security, administration becomes core into this platform. And so when we talk about this thing that is the Enterprise Data Hub, what becomes the bread and butter of this whole thing is that it's more economically feasible to bring all your data and predictably process and use that data. But what's really a radical change for your organization is being able to collect your data in its native format. When you load data to Hadoop, that's not the hard job. Loading is easy. With the processing frameworks that you put on top of that and how you interpret and use that data within your organization is a huge paradigm shift. The words in the industry you're going to hear is schema on read. And most of our enterprise data warehouses and our experience to date has been schema on write. Somebody designs a table structure, we force feed the data into it, the stuff that doesn't fit we throw on the cutting room floor, and happy day we have our data loaded in there. Hadoop is very different because you bring your data to the environment and then you put those frameworks on there. And as a result of that, you can build up a history of activity very quickly. Loading data is not your problem. How you apply those processing frameworks and using that data is. And with that, you create a community that accesses that data and creates a culture of innovation around that because it's easy now to pick up your data, start to work with it, pose a hypothesis, prove it or disprove it, and move on and get that into your enterprise. So the challenge that we say to you is on this, imagine what would you do if the limitation wasn't how much data you could store, that your capacity for storage of data is limited, that you could bring any type of data, image, files, video, text, structured data, things that came in rows and columns, but that you could control, you could manage, you could govern that, and you would enable your organization to ask new and different types of questions against that data.